Well, hey, Dr. Brian Roth, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited for the conversation that we're about to have. You are now currently an international forestry consultant. Whenever I had seen you last, you were the director of the Western Growth Organization, FGROW.
Yeah, the FGROW, Forest Growth Organization of Western Canada.
Yeah, so I get that one confused because it's a conglomerate of a few other growth and yield co-ops that got put together recently, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's now based at the University of Alberta, and the director is Robert Froese. So
Yeah.
I helped stand it up and make that transition there during the COVID era for a couple of years. So that was the transition from the FRI research in Hinton to the University of Alberta under Robert Froese. So that handoff has been made, and I'm on my own now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, sorry, I work in consulting forestry, and I'm always really interested to talk to other people who have, kind of started their own consulting businesses. And this isn't your first consulting company; it's your second, at least.
Yeah, it's a journey. You were asking, where do I apply? How do I become an international forestry consultant? And there is no application and there is no job. It just creates itself as you go. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And with your background, I can tell you have the spirit of adventure. You're not a person who is very comfortable staying in one place for your whole career. So you've moved around all of North America, and now you're, traversing the world.
Yeah, about a decade in each region, long enough to really get to know things, understand stuff, help people, and make an impact. And then it's usually time for transition.
Well, why don't you just get us started? How did you get interested into forestry, and what was the beginnings of this career path?
Right. Yeah, it started as a child. I'm one of those people that many people share this story of their mother pushing us out the door in the morning and say, go play outside in the forest. We were lucky to have a forest on our property. And so spent all my youth climbing trees and doing funny experiments with trees, pulling off their leaves and trying to understand how things work. And eventually found my way into a youth program in Canada. So I'm Canadian, was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and grew up there. And this youth program is called Junior Forest Wardens. And some people may be familiar with it, but it's similar to 4-H in that you meet on a regular basis, and there's uniforms and curricula and lots of field work and tours, and you're learning all about forest management, forest protection. And it was supported by the Alberta government at the time, so there were lots of resources, and we got to do all kinds of fun stuff. And that's what led me to a career in forestry and choose to go to university to get a forestry degree.
And that's awesome. You find, a lot of us have the same experiences growing up in the forest, and we enjoy it. And then we want to make a career out of tending that forest. It's interesting to see the ones that come from other backgrounds too, that are trying to find that they get that peace in the forest that we've all had. And so maybe they come from a large city or a large suburban area, and then they get there and they go, wow, this is great. This is everything. And I love the feeling of that, when you're out there by yourself and there's nobody around, and, the animals kind of forget you're there, and it's just so peaceful. And it's just like the most amazing stress relief you could ever have. So I don't know about you, but for me, I spend a lot of time behind a computer, and whenever I can, I grab my kid and we go to the forest. That's what we like to do.
Yeah. And everywhere I go in the world, there's forests. Maybe I'm avoiding those places where there are no forests, to be honest. But and everywhere that there's forests, there are people, and they use those forests for all different purposes. And a lot of them understand the forest very, very well. And so I like to visit with them and learn from them. What I learned with my undergraduate degree were, all the basics that you'd need, the math and chemistry and all those things. And, the only course in forestry we really had in our first year was dendrology. And that was the kind of the make it or break it, right? Where those that aren't serious drop out of the program after taking that dendrology course, because it is difficult.
Hmm.
learn all the Latin names and then learn the habits. And it's more than just identification. It's you need to be intimately familiar with those plants, especially for those practical exams. And that's a really nice introduction to forestry, because everywhere you go in the world, you're learning about how do these trees, how did they get here? What function do they serve? What's their Latin name? What's their common name? And so wherever you go, you get a chance to learn about forests, and that connects people together. And that dendrology course became very important.
Very important, and especially whenever you travel. So you just returned from South America,
Central America.
Central America. Oh, sorry, you were in Panama.
Yeah, there are a lot of biodiversity and a lot of tree species in that part of the world. It's
Yeah.
amazing, and yet some of them are kind of like have analogs to what we see in North America. And I just learned something interesting. You know, the pawpaw tree is in that same family as that sugar apple, the custard apple.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So anyway, it's a delicious fruit tree in Central America. Is one of my favorites, and the pawpaw is the only one of that genus that's in North America.
So you did your undergrad in Canada, in Alberta?
Yeah, the University of Alberta in my hometown. So I was a city kid that kind of grew up on the farm. Our family had a farm.
Yeah.
And I would be in the middle of the city in classrooms studying about forestry, and probably looking out the window, if there even was a window in those buildings, thinking about the forests and going places.
Mm-hmm.
And so our summer jobs were the opportunity to do that. So luckily in Canada, we get a long summer break between our classes, and it was enough to go out and have a real job and make enough money to pay for our university education. And the first job I had was as a helicopter rappel firefighter. So I got to go to Hinton, Alberta, and train in the center and rappel out of the tower, and then go out and do fire protection for the summer, flying around in Bell helicopters. And that introduced me to my province and all the different regions, from the mountains all the way out to the north part near the Northwest Territories and the flat parts. And then from there, ended up doing some work as a timber cruiser, a compassman on a timber inventory crew, just tromping through the swamps of northeastern Alberta as they were getting ready to put in a big pulp mill there. The government needed to know how much wood was available.
Those summer jobs are, really, really help make a person's mind up about what they want to do in a career.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity to find out what you don't want to do.
Exactly.
There's no shame in ending a summer job because it only lasts 3 months.
Right.
You get a good look on the inside. If it's something you appreciate and like, then you can come back another year. If not, go try something different.
Yeah.
And the following year, I had the opportunity to go on
the air alert is over.
Yeah.
May the force be with you. Attention. The air alert is over. May the force be with you.
That's Mark Hamill interrupting us.
Yeah.
So we didn't really let people know where I am right now, but I'm in Eastern Ukraine working with my charity. And there's a lot of air raid alarms as missiles are coming in. I'm in Kharkiv. And this air raid alarm that I have on there, the English version is narrated by Mark Hamill, and he does that nice thing at the end, may the force be with you. And it always cheers me up a little bit because it's a little disturbing to get those alarms. But this one just ended, so hopefully we can get through the interview without any more disruptions. So we were talking about my follow-up. I went to Sweden and worked on their national forest inventory as a summer exchange student. So that was my first foray into international work, and very interesting and rewarding to work on their national forest inventory and experience Europe and learn some Swedish and make new friends, which I still have to this day.
Yeah. Where were you? Obviously, if you're doing their national forest inventory, you're probably all over, but where were you based out of?
Yeah, so my region that we were working on, I was on a temporary plot crew. So we would cover the ground between the Baltic Sea and the Norwegian border in a strip that was about 150 kilometers wide. And what's nice about that, and that was kind of south of Umeå, down towards the northern kind of third of that, where that Baltic Sea comes in, that bay. So as you go over towards Trondheim in Norway, and then kind of this Skellefteå, Umeå, and south in there. And what's nice about that, and it was really ingenious, right? Because we're able to survey things that are down on the coast, and then all the way up into the Alpine. So I got to see that strip of Swedish forest, those kind of temperate forest, northern forest, in great detail, because we would start on the survey would be a square, and it was one kilometer on each side, so about 4 kilometers that we would walk on a transect. Already pre-established, and then at regular intervals you would stop, put in a plot of a different kind. So on the corners there were very detailed plots of forest inventory, soils, all that kind of thing. And then along the way at different intervals, every 200 meters there'd be a different kind of maybe regeneration plot or some survey plot. And that was in the late 1980s. That was quite a while ago. It was the year Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So,
wow.
Era. Yeah. So we were doing sampling from the Chernobyl radiological disaster that had happened a couple years earlier. So we were collecting moss samples everywhere we went, and all the other crews were doing the same thing. We were doing some air quality assessments on the shape of the trees, the spruce trees. There were, looking at the moss and lichens, and then all of your traditional forest inventory stuff from productivity, soils, the growth, the regeneration. If we would come across a clear cut, like it just, whatever was there, that kind of dictated what we would be measuring. Of course, as a young student, we loved it when we came to an empty field.
Right.
or a lake. It's like, it's water.
That one's easy. Yeah.
It's a field. Yeah.
That's a great experience. I love that part of the world. It's very beautiful. Of course, I went much later than you did. So I was there late 2010, so 2016 to 2020. So I'm sure it was quite a bit different, but still you get the same regions and they're beautiful. I didn't spend a lot of time in the forest, but traveling back and forth to Umeå and by train and by car. It's just really amazing to see that part of the world.
Yeah.
They, of course, now have their National Forest Inventory system set up. That's all permanent plots and it's gridded. So I imagine the experiences are quite different than it was when you were there in the late 80s.
Yeah, well, and they just turned 100 last year or the year before. So that's 100 years of National Forest Inventory in Sweden.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fascinating what you can do with data sets that are that long. And there's lots of students that have been tapping into that resource because it's public domain.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be a part of basically a group, the Nordic group that was Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and combining all of the national forest inventories together to do analysis. And that was so much fun. I mean, of course, quite complicated, joining different inventories of different types from different, time periods. But it was an excellent experience and great to meet those people from all the different countries and hear their histories and their past and why they got into forestry as well. So it's not just the data, but it's also the experiences behind the data that for me are quite interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And then anyway, so that was a nice experience, and I came home with a new appreciation for international forestry and that connection.
I was so in the building that I worked at in Norway, it was built with the bunker in the basement, of course, and that eventually became the library that was housing all of the old field books. And so I was looking, so I worked in my PhD and my dissertation, I worked on growth density relationships. So Langsetter's hypothesis was one of those. And Langsetter was a Norwegian forester. And I found his field books where he's out on horseback measuring permanent plot data in the height of German occupation of Norway. So in the early 40s, right? And I'm going like, man, this is dedication. Or if you needed somewhere to be, probably out in the middle of nowhere in Norway is the place to be. That was a good excuse to get to the field.
Yeah, and we're still learning about density management. But his hypothesis is definitely worth testing. We had some permanent sample plots when I worked at Weyerhaeuser, testing that hypothesis in Washington State, in Douglas fir.
Yeah, I gave a presentation at I believe it was 2018, was a UFRO and Southern Mensurationist Conference. I think it was also Northern Mensurationist Conference. It was all of them combined. So I gave my presentation on Langsetter's hypothesis, and then I won't name him, but a Weyerhaeuser retired biometrician came to me a bit later and said, hey, we already tested this at Weyerhaeuser in the 80s, and yeah, we got the same thing you got. Yeah. I said, well, if you guys ever published anything, maybe I wouldn't have had to do what I had to do.
Yeah, well, you described everything. I did a lot of work that is in a library somewhere in Weyerhaeuser that's maybe it's thrown out now. I don't know if they even have a library anymore.
I'm sure they've got it stored somewhere.
Well, I signed a confidentiality agreement, so I couldn't share that anyway.
Yeah.
And I know who you're talking about, and I can hear him saying that.
Yeah. And that's what, it's like, I can't give you the details. I signed a confidentiality agreement, but I can tell you, you're pretty spot on what you found.
Well, I used to like it when I worked at Weyerhaeuser. So I can tell you that after I graduated with a master's degree from Oregon State, I went to work for Weyerhaeuser Company. After a short stint with McMillan Blodell on Vancouver Island, I went to Federal Way, Washington. And after all the interviews and the job offer, and then signing away all those non-disclosure forms, which they do bring back out on your exit interview, they bring a little sheet of paper with your signature. And mine was from when I was a student, and I did a little bit of work with them.
Wow.
So somehow their record keeping was that good that they could produce the actual piece of paper from when I was a summer student. Wow. And that counts all the way through. But anyway, there's a moment where they're like, okay, welcome to Weyerhaeuser, you've got your security clearance and all that stuff now. Now we're going to tell you everything that you should have learned in school that you didn't, and there's enough to rewrite some textbooks. But what was nice about it is one of our roles was to go to the co-op meetings, and to go to like the co-op meeting up there in Seattle, and kind of watch them develop some of those different trials and kind of push them in a certain direction without spilling the beans. It's like, well, you might want to push that one treatment a little further. Like, that's not extreme enough. You should be maybe bump it up a little bit.
Right.
You want to just, it was very, very nice to be on the inside of such a large organization and doing that kind of work.
Yeah, and I wonder just how much of that has gone on over the years with the Weyerhaeuser biometricians not being able to say much, but going, yeah, that's probably a good path you could take there. I might suggest you do this or that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, I've had Mike Strube on the podcast previously, and now he's working he's an adjunct at Virginia Tech, and he's working with Dr. Corey Green to work on some new individual tree models with Organon, now fitting that to Southern pine plantation data. And he was going, I can tell you guys that I think this will probably work, which tells me he's probably done it before.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And so as you were a research forester, that was your first job after your master's.
Yeah. Actually, the first job after the master's was as a field forester with McMillan Blodell. Okay. I think I was the only forester in a division with 500 loggers in Franklin River logging camp. So this was at the time it was the largest logging camp in the world. And we would bus our employees in from Port Alberni. My house was in Port Alberni, out on Vancouver Island. And we drive down to Franklin River every morning and marshal up, and all the crews would get together and go off in their different directions. And I was doing forestry stuff, but it was all old growth logging. They weren't even touching the first growth yet.
Wow.
So if you weren't an engineer building the roads up to the top of those hills, or an actual harvester or trucker, they'd take all those logs down to the water and dump them into the water and put the cables around them and then tow them out to the sawmills. Some of it would go to the pulp mill in town, but it was still a brief glimpse of the past, because things changed pretty quickly after that era. That was in around 1994. So
Yeah.
I got the offer to go and work in the technology center with Weyerhaeuser, and I had already been a summer intern for a while and was really loved the Pacific Northwest. So I had to jump and take that offer and work then as a research forester. And of course, a few months later, Weyerhaeuser bought McMillan Blodell. So I guess I was destined to be a Weyerhaeuser employee at some time.
I don't want to jump ahead a little bit, but you eventually came to the Southeast. So comparing, your forestry experience in the Pacific Northwest at the time compared to what we were doing in the Southeast at the time must have been night and day different.
Yeah, and especially when I go out in the field with some of the field foresters, and I just didn't know what was going on, and they say, "Brian, rah, 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 rah."
Yeah.
I'm Canadian, and I just had trouble with that Southern dialect. And
Right.
finally, one guy took me aside and he said, "Brian, look, we can't understand you either."
That's funny.
And after that, I was good. We were fine. Everything was good, because I just was, it was, I think, even the heat and the insects but this is life. When you go somewhere new, it's worth it. It takes a while. It just takes a while. And then eventually you settle in and you understand. But it's good to experience different things. It gets you out of your comfort zone a bit. It exposes you to different ideas and concepts. There's always a reason for the type of forestry that's being practiced in one region is. Maybe it's just tradition, but there's a reason they got to that point. And if you can understand that, it makes it much easier to influence change and improvement.
Yeah.
And you can borrow those ideas and bring them elsewhere is what I've been learning on my journey.
Yeah. And while you might come and bring some knowledge and some experience from elsewhere that might be very helpful, I think it's very important not to go and just immediately start criticizing whatever they're doing in the region, because like you said, they got there for a reason. So whether it's just tradition or whatever. And so I found in Norway, of course, I come from the Southeast US. We thin everything. In Norway, there wasn't a whole lot of thinning, and I was trying to work on influencing thinning. And I realized very quickly that there is a very strong tradition for why they do things the way that they do. Yeah. And so learning those intricacies about the culture and the integration of forestry into the culture is very, very important wherever you go.
Yeah, but there's always room for improvement, and what you need is some innovation and creativity, especially with these new challenges that we're faced with now with climate change and markets, and there's just so many things that are hitting us from all different directions. We really can't be stuck in the old ways. We need to be looking for ways to improve.
Yeah, and I think you probably see that across the world, that the times are just changing, things are changing, and we have to figure out how to adapt.
Yeah, and in forestry, the decisions we make today have an impact 20, 30 years down the road. So it does matter. And whoever takes over from us is going to be thanking us or cursing us.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's why I always said that I wanted to work with red pine, because if you're working in red pine, the decisions you make, it's not you that will realize those, it's the next person. So if you messed up royally, you're not ever going to figure it out. Anyway, so you went to a research position. Is that the reason that you got interested to go on and do a PhD after?
Yeah, so I guess we should talk about my master's degree a little bit, and the fun times I had at Oregon State University, or Douglas First State University. Yeah, so I was always kind of a curious kid, and kind of asking why and how come, how much. And I was lucky enough to get an assistantship working on a herbicide dissipation project with Mike Newton at Oregon State University in the early 90s, 91 through 94. And as part of that, I got to travel to Alaska and do some herbicide dissipation work up in Alaska and all the way down through Washington, Oregon, and California, and really get to know that area well. And Mike, he would admit he's a brush ape, but he's actually an incredibly good ecologist.
Mm-hmm.
He passed away a few years ago, but really a living legend. And I was so privileged to get to work with Mike and his students and his assistant, Liz Cole. I even bought some timberland while I was there because he said, save your lunch money, just be like TJ Starker from Starker Forests and buy some land. And, that was probably as much of an education as what I got at Oregon State University, was going out on weekends and some evenings to my property and rehabilitating it and putting it back into a seriously productive forest. Mm-hmm. And that exists to this day. I'm out there. Last fall, I went out and harvested 2 truckloads full of 40-foot long saw timber that I planted as a student for my master's degree.
Wow.
And I did that myself with borrowed equipment over a 1-week vacation, 1.5, 2 weeks. I went from standing timber that needed to be thinned to 2 truckloads of wood headed to Weyerhaeuser Company.
Wow, that's awesome. And you already start to kind of reap the benefits of that investment, and that's amazing.
And 35 years goes fast.
I know, right?
It's a big number, but I remember watching those trees grow at every stage. Yeah. It's an interesting story. I have 3 children that were born while I was in university, and we have a thing with them that, you plant a tree when a child's born. And so they have no interest in forestry, but they did want to see the trees that were planted. And one of the vacations I took there, and I couldn't remember it all. Things change over there. And so, this is your tree. And I was just randomly picking trees. And then later when I told them last year, and they're all adults now, but I told them, I'm going to be harvesting some timber there. I'm thinning it out. We're going to take 1/3 of the trees roughly. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. And then you could see the wheels turning. Well, don't cut my tree, cut my brother's tree. Because they did the math on it. And there was 3 children. So they're like, someone's losing a tree.
Right. and make sure it's not my tree that gets cut down.
Yeah. So my research project with Mike, he gave me the flexibility to do something on the side, separate from the assistantship that I had. And I chose to do some herbicide work and regeneration. So it was a nice little 2x2x2 factorial with herbicide, fertilizer, and genetics, because these are all of the things that I thought would be interesting for regeneration. And Starker Forest was kind enough to loan me some of their property to put in this trial on, and I did some up at the McDonald Research Forest. Spent a lot of effort selecting the sites, planting it, getting the seedlings, measuring things. Everything was rolling great. I got the herbicide down. I got the fertilizer down. I was starting to see some differences, and it was springtime, and the deer hammered it. And I'd never seen that before. I was only there for a year, and I was in almost tears, right, going to my advisor. The deer have eaten everything. How do I stop them? What do I do? I'm not going to graduate, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of chuckled, and because I think he knew it was going to happen, but he said, just analyze the data, measure it, analyze the data, and then report on the results and see what comes out of it. You're going to have to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So just, it's science. You just measure everything and then report on it. And what was interesting was that the trees that had the weed control, that didn't have the competition with them, had enough moisture in the soil during the dry part of the year that they did a second flush. There was an extra little burst of growth that emerged around that shoot that had got eaten off. And it was, not a lot, 4 to 6 inches of growth. Mm-hmm. But that tree was more robust than what was buried in the weeds, especially where we fertilized the weeds. We fertilized the weeds, not the trees. Well, those ones were really suffering.
Yeah.
So that was good, that interaction, to know that if you're going to, apply a resource that's limiting, make sure the competition doesn't take it up and fight you for it.
Right.
But it was interesting that if you want to recover from deer browse, you should be killing the weeds, and that was the theme of that paper, and that paper still gets cited today. That chapter in the master's program, and
Awesome.
so, yeah, everywhere people have some issues with deer browse, it seems like.
Yeah. So it's great to have your master's work cited anyway. I'm sure whenever you finish it, you're going like, man, that was not very good. And
No.
then it turns out it's actually useful information to someone.
Yeah, exactly. And similar with my PhD in the mid 2000s in Florida. And we had that rash of hurricanes blow through. There were one on top of the other. And it was like my research trials, and they were very complex and big, were magnets for these storms. A couple of them even circled around, made a loop, and then came back and hit it on the way out.
Oh no.
One of the sites got hit by two separate hurricanes. And then even the stuff in East Texas. I had a batch out in East Texas, and Hurricane Rita and Katrina, they went over it, and it was just amazing. So some got hit, some didn't. But again, that was one of those moments where it's like, these things are blown over. What are we going to learn? And it was a similar thing that, with genotype by environment, there's certain things that are getting another air raid.
Attention, air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter. Don't be careless. Your overconfidence is your weakness.
I'm trying to turn it off.
Attention, air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter.
Sorry about that.
Don't be careless. Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Okay. Anyway, the research was kind of showed that certain genotypes don't like the wind, and that they didn't have the same rooting structure, and they blew over, and then there were other genotypes that didn't. And that was interesting. So a little climate change thrown into the mix.
Yeah, a little bit of a opportunity forced your way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's interesting, because those installations do tend to be large and expensive, and it doesn't take but one natural disaster to really change your working plan on what you're going to do with those data.
Yeah, and in forest ecology, what I've been noticing, if you stick around long enough, as many decades as I have, you'll see things. And it seems like in forestry, there's these very brief interventions or events that cause a large disturbance. Maybe it's an ice storm or some kind of a late snow, and it breaks off a bunch of trees or certain species. Maybe it's a late freeze, and you'll see that persist for decades. And maybe you'll go several decades without anything as significant, and then wham. It's very interesting how in a very short period of time you can have long-term consequences from climate.
Right. And we are experiencing right now, because of the droughts that we've been having these past few years. It's been so hot, it's been so dry, and of course we're getting wildfires. So one of the things that I've been tasked with is coming up with decision tools to, when do you need to start over a forest that has been basically wrecked by fire? Is it indeed too far gone, or do we need to can we wait a little bit and see if it works? And so that's been interesting for me, because I work in some species that are not as prominent as, say, loblolly pine, and then you're looking for information in the literature for those species, and it might be 50, 70 years ago was the last time that there was any major disasters that were a part of trials that they were able to indeed take that information and make some kind of decision tool with. So, like, does the 50 or 70-year-old research data apply to my current forest? Probably not that much, but maybe we can get some information out of it.
Yeah, it's about information, right? Because what is it we're doing? We're making decisions.
Right.
We're not making perfect models. We're not making something that's going to last forever. What we're doing is providing somebody with a tool or some information or knowledge that allows them to make a decision.
Right.
And if we can always keep that in mind, it's very helpful. So when I worked at Weyerhaeuser and it was a vice president that needed to make a decision about how do I spend this $500,000 on my silviculture budget, or as a researcher trying to decide is product A better than product B and vice versa, you need just enough information to have enough confidence to make a decision. You can make a decision even without the information, but it's better to make a decision that points you generally in the right direction.
Right.
And that's good to know, right? It's about making decisions. What do we need to make decisions? Because right now we're bombarded with so much information, right? All of the LiDAR has given us these enhanced forest inventories and individual tree assessments. It's more information and data now than ever before, and you can absolutely overwhelm the decision maker.
Right.
And so we need a tool that gives you just enough information to make the right decision, and then take those resources and go on to the next problem.
Yeah, and you said an important word there, to have the confidence in the decision. So being able to come up with the tool that gives you enough confidence to make that decision. I would like to hear from somebody with your experience, because one of the things is you spend a lot of time, going through school. You maybe get to a point where you're, postmasters, post PhD, you're in your first or second position, and then you're trying to, come up with ways. Now I'm the one that has to come up with the decision-making tools. And it's that confidence there that is a little bit of key. You have to have confidence that you are making the right decisions, but without having a history of seeing your decisions work out, it's a little bit nerve-wracking at times.
Sure. But what I'm learning now is there's a first for everything. Right. This year, there's been a lot of things that have been a first for me. And it's uncomfortable, and it's a little bit scary and risky to step into your uncomfort zone. But just remember, no matter how big and important somebody is, they always did something too for the first time. So don't let that paralyze you. So a note to the junior people out there: go ahead, take risks, try things. It's always good to do it with a mentor around, just so you're not in that situation where, oh wow, I'm all alone out on this one. I guess we'll try this. The other thing is uncertainty. So we talked about so uncertainty. If you can have a map of uncertainty, where are you less certain about things than others? Maybe in certain areas or places you have high confidence, but there's some spots where the models just don't perform well. That's as powerful, right? Because then you can kind of wing it. It's like, well, this model's telling me this, but that may not be. That's a 50-50 right there. So, right. Let's not do too much extreme stuff in that spot.
Yeah, I always like to quote George Box. All models are wrong, some are useful. So whenever I get the questions, how is this, how is that, is it going to work out how we expect it, I say, I believe the models are useful, and this is where they work, and this is where I think they don't work, and we can infer this from that. And that's about as good as you can do in making a decision, because like you said, models are definitely weak in some areas. We extrapolate every single day.
Well, yeah, and the data that goes into them. And so working with some of these different cooperatives, including the Western Canada Growth and Yield Co-op, you can look at the data and the quality of data over time and see changes depending on even just the weather. We'd run student crews all the time going out measuring things, and maybe it rained every week that summer, and they were just not happy about being out there, and the quality of the data suffers. And if you have a good auditing process, you can kind of get a feel for how much variation you're getting due to measurement error. And just putting an extra variable in your database that says, here's how confident we are about this year's data would be great, because then you can be like, let's just ignore these 3 data measurements, right? Or I don't care as much. I'll use all the data and draw a line through it. But having some measure of confidence, even in the data, would be a nice thing. And we don't have that everywhere we go. But it should be a requirement.
Yeah.
You have an audit with an actual metric that measures your confidence.
One of the one of the things that I try to impart upon my foresters here at my company, they, of course, they're all forest managers. They're very good at what they do, but their understanding of sampling is they know how to do cruises. They're very good at it. They're very efficient at it, but they don't see where the data goes after the fact. So the importance of, for example, measuring height data to get a good site index estimate, because site index is in every single model that we have. So that's one of the important things that I think is sometimes missed in maybe the field crew is what happens with the data after the fact. And it's having that understanding can make you, probably be better equipped to answer some of those questions. Like, why was the data not as good? Well, it's been raining for 5 weeks, so my diameter measurement is probably inflated a little bit because of bark swell. Yeah. But yeah, I'm totally on board with you. We need better, better notes on the data. We generally get data in, very, the same format every time, and it'll be very rudimentary data. It's just, these were the measurements and these are what they are, and nothing else about what was going on at the site at the time.
Yeah.
So we've got to the master's degree. You were working on that, and then you were about to transition.
Yeah, it was time to make a move, Weyerhaeuser. I'd been there for a while, and I thought, boy, it should be nice to be the one kind of making the decisions and telling other people what to do. And so for that, I would need a PhD. And so I talked to Lee Allen at the nutrition co-op, the productivity co-op at NC State. And I went down and talked to Eric Chocola and Tim White and Tim Martin at the Forest Biology Research Co-op in Gainesville, Florida, and ended up making a choice to go to Gainesville and work full-time managing that research co-op, but also do a PhD at the same time. And so I did that for pretty much most of the 2000s, the early part of the 2000s. And that was a very interesting time and place to be doing production forestry. We were really pushing the envelope on some of those plantations. The mission of that co-op was to increase the productivity, but maintain the sustainability, and to do that by looking at mechanisms. So we had some very nice research trial that was put in the spring. I showed up there examining culture by density by family. So those three things in both loblolly pine and slash pine. And we were really pushing those things. Two contrasting densities and a contrasting culture. There were annual fertilizations, weed control, tip moth control. Those trees were growing as fast as they could on that one extreme plot. And what that allows us to do is look at interactions. So that was the focus of my PhD work, and one of their major projects was on genotype by environment interaction. And that environment, it could be a natural environment or silviculture. It's basically all about making decisions about how and where to deploy certain genotypes and take advantage of those unique characteristics. And that took me all the way from Virginia, all the way out to East Texas, managing all those different trials. And we had a bunch of other trials out there also with clonal forestry and things. So a very, very good place to learn about production forestry.
Yeah, for sure. So I would have been an undergrad in East Texas at Stephen F. Austin at that time. I started in 2003. And then stayed there through 2010. I did my master's there as well. So we participated in helping on some of the different co-ops research data, but I don't think I ever worked with you guys from the...
Yeah, we were mostly partnering with Texas A&M. Yeah.
And at that time, they still had a very, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. At that time, they still had a very strong forestry program. They've gone more towards kind of range and wildlife management and production forestry. But they definitely did a lot, and they have some good people on staff there that are still doing. We're partnering with them in some carbon work right now. So it's a great university, a great group of people there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really appreciated my time in the Southeast. That was
Yeah.
special time for me. And then
Well,
towards the end of that, I got to go out and do some consulting, some independent consulting after I graduated. While I was right in that process of all but done, right? Done with
right.
classes, done with the data collection, done with
ABD.
analysis. Yeah, right. And then there's always a little bit at the end, which seems to be sometimes the hardest thing when you have all these other obligations in your life as a mature student.
And children at that time, right?
Yeah, 3 children. There was another one born at the University of Florida. So
Yeah.
the older two would come to classes with me while my wife was in the hospital.
Yeah.
And this week, my oldest daughter is graduating, is defending her PhD thesis at the University of Alberta.
Oh, that's exciting.
So it's full circle. I can't outsmart her anymore.
Well, mine's only 4, and he's already outsmarting me. So he's teaching me Spanish right now.
All right.
Correcting my pronunciation.
Yes.
Because I still sound like an East Texas redneck sometimes. But it can't have been easy to, I had children after the fact, but have children while you're in school, and then you're running a co-op, you're directing a co-op, and then you're also starting a consulting business. Like, you're just a machine.
The consulting business was at the end of the employment with the university. So
after.
So there was a transition to the real world while I was finishing my writing. Those assistantships, they only last so long, Mickey. They don't go on forever.
Right.
So the money has to come from somewhere, and nothing like necessity to force you to be creative and learn new things and find people that will appreciate what it is that you have to offer. And that's what takes me around the world these days. So if there's anybody that is looking for somebody to consult with on a project or research or any kind of a management thing, I'm always happy to listen. And if it's interesting, you never know, I might end up helping you out. So there's a little plug for my international work.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting going. So we're just getting to, you're starting a consulting business, but from what you've learned from there to now to going to an international consulting business is quite a big leap. Whenever I was doing my PhD, I never thought about consulting. I never thought about it being a valid career path, mostly because the biometricians that I knew were either in academia or industry. And so I didn't think about what it could mean to work outside of those two. And now that I'm in consulting, I just see, wow, like the horizon is just huge here. Like, there's just so much room, so much possibility, because there are so many different answers or questions that need to be answered that won't necessarily come from one of those other two places. Yeah. And they need people like us to do that. I think it is amazing that you're doing this internationally. I couldn't even think about, because you're probably having to learn about forest types and ecosystems with long histories that you've never been in before. So that's really amazing. I want to get there, but before you got to the international experience, you went back to Canada. You went back home.
Yeah, I went back home. It was the pandemic that took me home. Our prime minister. So I'm a dual citizen. I'm born in Canada, but got a green card in the States while I was going to school, and then citizenship. Before that, I went to the University of Maine and spent a decade up there working with Aaron Weiskettel and Bob Wagner with the Forest Research Cooperative Unit out of Orono, Maine. So that gave me a nice exposure after my PhD work to the Acadian forest, which I was really interested in. Mixed woods are incredibly complicated after you're used to working with loblolly pine and slash pine. It's a little bit of the opposite. And I'll admit it took about 2 to 3 years before I sort of felt some confidence in understanding how things were working. But that was a very rewarding experience because that co-op was working on all kinds of issues. I got to learn about remote sensing and LIDAR and enhanced forest inventory, wildlife habitat, insects, diseases, harvesting, productivity, hydrology. It was so many different projects and all in a very interesting part of the world.
Yeah.
And I got to meet all kinds of cool people that came and went. So some students from Nepal, these Nepali students are everywhere because it's a
Mhm.
giant brain drain. The country is, if
Right.
you have any intelligence, you end up leaving, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So that gave me a connection to Nepal. And then that's where I ended up doing some volunteer work. And it's always a safe place to go and try things as a volunteer or on vacation or when you're on loan. So I'd say that was probably a transition for me to international work, is under the relative safety of volunteering with an international organization and that organization was called Sea Tree, or it still exists. And they're planting indigenous tree nurseries in impoverished regions throughout Nepal, helping women's groups. So it's all women's groups that are doing these tree nurseries, and it's definitely improving their livelihoods. So it
Mhm.
was immensely satisfying to get a foothold in doing that and learn about a totally different part of the world and live there and experience it, and that was fantastic. But yeah, that's when COVID reared its ugly head, and the prime minister said, if you're abroad, you need to come home. And sure enough, the airport was closing. So
Yeah.
I went back to Edmonton, Alberta, and worked from a computer for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And now you
Well,
work from a computer anywhere, anytime, and
right.
that's how I'm able to be in eastern Ukraine now.
And that's it. It took the pandemic to make us realize that we can still be quite productive by not being in an office. And we were already working from our computers anyway. We were
Right?
just doing it in a different space.
Exactly.
But yeah. And I guess that's great to see that has led to you being able to expand your international consulting business to an international consulting business, because you can work wherever you are. Um, and I like your comment about Nepal. I have a lot of my colleagues from the PhD. Well, several of my colleagues from the PhD were from Nepal. And now one of my colleagues here at Larson and McGowan and my good friend Sabeksha Jha is from Nepal. So I've been very much enjoying learning about their culture and, of course, the forestry experience there, which is quite different from
Very.
but any of my experiences, which is production forestry in the Southeast US or in the Nordics, but all production forestry, and how their forestry there is just quite different. And then the range from the tropical region, from the jungle all the way up into the Himalayas. So I imagine that's just been a blast.
Oh yeah, fantastic. I got to partner with the Peace Corps on a bunch of projects. And so the Peace Corps was very interested in working with our organization because we would physically get to go to the villages where it was difficult for the people in the embassy to get out.
Yeah.
And so we would partner with Peace Corps volunteers, and get to go to their village and do an assessment with the volunteers, and then actually put in a nursery with the volunteers and help them with the distribution of those seedlings when they grew up. And it was so nice to be able to be with a dozen different Peace Corps volunteers and experience that without having to join Peace Corps and donate a couple of years of our life to living in a remote village.
Right. Which it would be fun if you could maybe, I guess, pick and choose exactly where you wanted to be. I think you don't have fully control over that, right? You get to state your wishes, but it's like
You get to pick the top three, and then they assign you a spot.
you also you've done some work in Nepal, you've done some work in South America, and now let's full circle back to where you are now in the middle of air raids. You're in the Ukraine right now, and
Yeah.
you have been working for at least a year.
No, I've been here twice. This last trip I arrived about a week ago.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a lot of action going on, and this is the biggest thing happening in our generation. And there are people just like you and I over here in Ukraine that are trying to do their jobs, and on top of it, they have to deal with this full-scale invasion and ongoing challenges. And so that kind of concerned me, that I'm not doing enough sitting at home watching the news and knowing that there are people that could use some help. And so Brian Milikowski, who's a forester from Maine, also met him in Maine. And I share this idea that we should be able to do more. And so we set up a foundation to help out with Ukrainian foresters and forest users. Mainly right now, we're doing some safety equipment, some training on firefighting. We're going to be moving more towards some forest management and long-term kind of sustainability. And so the name of the organization is Forest Release. So you can look it up at www.forestrelease.org and see what we're all about. We're also dealing with landmines and unexploded ordnance in the territories that have been liberated. So half the area that the Russians occupied has been liberated. So that is a huge area that a lot of it is contaminated with landmines, unexploded ordnance. And there are things like forest fires and trees that need to be thinned and stuff that needs to be salvaged. And the foresters don't have the equipment or tools or training to do that work. Like, for example, right now there's a 1,000-hectare forest fire that the Russians started with some shelling, and it's in the next region over on that frontier where the front is, and they can't action it. They just kind of watching it with drones, and when it gets up close to a road, they can action it, but it's not safe to physically go in there. And then how, you got a couple of years to salvage that timber. How do you salvage stuff that's been burned? And then reforestation, or do you reforest? Because a lot of those forests are actually Soviet era forests where they're doing production forestry on soils that maybe aren't suited for that. But maybe there should be more ecological forestry or a closer to nature forestry. So that's where we'd like to go eventually. But for now, I'm here. I have a lot of donations of equipment that we're distributing, helping out with some training, and just awareness. Just the fact that I'm here brings attention to the area that there are people still working on these things. And it's a beautiful place. I mean, Kharkiv is a very beautiful city. It just happens to be really, really close to Russia, and they have plans to come in here and take it over. I don't think they have the resources to do it, the Russians, but it's real, and we should pay attention to these things. And so if anyone would like to donate, you can go to our website and donate, or just visit with me. I'm trying to get some training set up in Canada for the forest firefighters here on incident command center trainings, get some structured training for them. They don't have that here. So that would be the next thing I'm working on for this summer, is to bring some foresters over to get them trained up so they can train others.
Yeah. So if people want to donate, that's at your www.forestrelease.org.
Correct. Yeah. It's just a PayPal account there.
Okay. So,
or if they have, hey, Mickey, if they've got any inventory equipment, seriously, they've got diameter tapes or calipers or like physical stuff that they're not using. We're in desperate need of GPS receivers. So everything from, the fixed point, high resolution stuff to handheld communications equipment, radios, even drones. First person view drones are very useful when you can't walk on the forest. You can still fly, although the military frowns on that here. So any kind of equipment, I can come and get it, and we can get it shipped over. So that's a serious ask.
Cool. And we'll make sure we put that in the LinkedIn post with your information and where people can donate those things. And do you have like an address maybe that they can send stuff? Is there a place here in the US or in Canada?
Yeah, if it's in the States, we'll figure it out. I've got addresses in the States and in Canada, and I travel around a fair bit. I'll be doing a project in northern Alberta this summer, so I'll be back in about 3 weeks. I'll come back over and gather up things and do stuff.
Well, I would like to ask you a couple more questions about what you're doing right now, because when, at least here in the States, we're kind of desensitized to the whole situation because it's just been going on so long, and now there's other conflicts that are popping up, and so it's kind of just being lost, and you really forget about the people and the day-to-day lives that they're living and having to live around this thing. So I'm curious, how has this conflict affected the forest industry? Is that affecting everything from their ability to rebuild, or what's going on with all of that?
Yeah, Ukraine is a very large country. It's the largest country in Europe. It's a fairly small proportion of forested area. It really is the breadbasket of the world. So a lot of fields, but in certain areas there are forests. So it adds up. A little bit of a lot is a lot, and it's over 7 million hectares of forests that are managed. Some of it's in the west, in the Carpathian Mountains, and that's some beautiful kind of beech, hardwood, broadleaf mixed forests that they do kind of a continuous cover forestry there. And then others are just this Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris, pines and lines, very familiar to the southeast, but much more slow growing.
Right.
And that is really, they're struggling with one, supplying the military, because the military uses that wood to make their bunkers. They use that wood for heating in the winter, for staying warm. The country is right now under severe a plan to destroy their infrastructure and their electricity grid. So there is a lot of people heating with wood in the winter, and then there's some export bans and things too. But really, there's fewer foresters. There's 3,000. There's 3,000 foresters that are out doing the work along this border region, and that's a lot of people, and it's still not enough. So
Yeah.
we have to think of a lot of them. A third of them went to serve in the military. Some have been killed, and others have gone abroad. So you have a declining workforce.
Yeah.
And then just this climate change, we're getting these droughts. They had some severe fires in 2000 that were just record breaking, and whole towns burning and things. So they're dealing with that on top of the war.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned previously about the hurricanes in the southeast, and one of the things that will probably, and the connection here is the down woody debris that comes from that. So from this conflict with the Russians blowing up the forest, and then you get all of that dead stuff down, and then you get extreme droughts with lots of fuels, that just contributes to the fire hazard, right?
Yeah.
Attention. The air alert is over. May the force be with you.
That's Mark Hamill. He does the voiceover on the air raid warnings on the English version, at least.
I love it, and how fitting May the 4th being this past weekend.
Right. Well, and yesterday was the Orthodox Easter.
Oh, okay.
For all of the people that follow the Orthodox calendar, this was a very religious day, as big as Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some bombings, and some people were killed here with these glide bombs that they drop in, and they kind of fly through the air. So they've taken these old bombs, old technology, big heavy bombs, and put wings on them and a GPS guidance system, and then just drop them from a very high altitude with pre-programmed coordinates, and that bomb basically flies itself kind of horizontal, and just, it's hard to believe that it was never designed for that, and yet here we are. So new technology can be used for the force of evil also.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking about yesterday when we were celebrating Easter.
So, we've had a couple interruptions from your air raid alarms there, but you seem to be fairly calm. How are you feeling, being over there? Obviously, there's active bombing going on.
The thing's going off nonstop. There's air raids. Like, it seems like it's every hour. They stepped up the campaign here in Kharkiv right before my arrival, and over the next 10 days, they have a big push. So this is, I guess what I'm saying is, it's amazing what you can get used to. So we have some things that give us, so they're talking about blackouts and multiple launch rocket systems and missiles. That last alarm, there was a couple reconnaissance UAVs in the northeastern part of the city. So that's actually where I am now. And so this stuff is part of life. It's amazing what you can get used to. I learned to be brave from the Ukrainian people that I'm around. They've been living this is going on 3 years now. Mm-hmm. And this city was almost surrounded, second largest city in Ukraine, was almost totally surrounded at the beginning of that full-scale invasion. And they're resilient, and there's a lot we can learn from them, but they are exhausted and tired of it, but they just deal with it. It's like one more thing added to your list of hazards you'll experience during the day, is that you may have a power failure or a bomb drop on something and blows it up, and they just deal with it.
I can't imagine what it would be like to go through that, not just for some days, but for years. It's got to weigh heavily on you, as you know, you're living there and just hoping something happens to stop that entire conflict.
Yeah, I can't speak for them, but just by being here is like a huge relief for them. They're like, oh, wow, you could be anywhere in the world. You choose to be here. And thank you for your help. And they say we don't see that many, tourists or foreigners or anything over here. There's a lot of foreigners fighting on the front, and a lot of aid organizations, but after a while that tapers off. But it's just really, really good people, and they're just dealing with everyday stuff. And then on top of it is their neighbors are very aggressive.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, and there are probably many places in the world where they have similar concerns about their neighbors, but I think it's very admirable that you have chosen to go there and help them, with their problems during this conflict. As you just mentioned, there's not many people, and you're the only forester I know that's over there actively assisting. And so, again, really admirable. I really thank you for your dedication to our field and to the people.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want you just one last time, tell people how they can reach you, where they need to go to donate, and what is the best. Should they reach out by email or through LinkedIn, or what's the best approach?
Yeah, all social media platforms, email. The email address you can reach me at is Brian, so first name, Brian, at rothforestry.com. So that's my last name, forestry, all one word, .com. And be happy to visit with you and talk with you about anything, anytime. Who knows, I might even be in your part of the world. We can talk in person. LinkedIn's a good one. You can just find me there. It's Brian Roth. And then I think there's some letters after my name to filter out all the other Brian Roths in the world. I think it's got a PhD or something after it. So you can search and find me there. And then, of course, Facebook, Instagram, you can find me on that. But the foundation is forestrelease.org, and you can see about our work there. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm doing a project in Northern Alberta after this, and it doesn't fill all my time, so I still have time to do fun things and volunteer like this and take on other projects.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and having the conversation with us, and I wish you the best.
All right. Thanks, Mickey, for this opportunity. It was good to visit with you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.